Asterisk, it was a bitterly cold morning. Okay, the grassy plains were covered in frost, and the bare tree branches trembled in the wind. A small village nestled between the hills was slowly coming to life as people huddled around their fires, trying to stay warm. Not far from the village, in a snow-dusted patch of woodland, a little girl named Ellie was collecting firewood with her father. Ellie was just 6 years old, with golden curls and the kind of wide, curious eyes that could melt even the hardest heart. She was known for her kindness. She would nurse wounded birds, feed stray dogs, and offer her toys to sad children without thinking twice. Asterisk, that morning, as she trailed a few steps behind her father, a soft sound caught her attention. It was faint like a whimper, but enough to make her stop. She tilted her head, listening more closely. There it was again, a cry tiny, desperate. She turned toward the direction of the sound and walked carefully through the brittle grass and low bushes. What she found stopped her in her tracks. Asterisk, lying under a thin layer of brush, was a baby, no more than a few months old, shivering violently in the freezing cold. Its skin was pale, lips tinged with blue, and it was wrapped in nothing more than a thin cloth. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. She knew no mother would ever leave her baby like this, unless something terrible had happened. The baby's tiny fists were clenched, and its cries were growing weaker. Ellie didn't think. She pulled off the thick woolen blanket wrapped around her shoulders, the one her grandmother had hand-stitched for her last Christmas, and gently covered the baby with it. Her small hands cupped the baby's face, trying to warm it with her body. Asterisk, moments later, her father, Jack, called out to her and came running when she didn't answer. When he saw Ellie kneeling over the tiny bundle, his expression shifted from confusion to concern. He crouched beside her, gently lifting the baby. This child. It looks like it belongs to the native tribe, he said slowly. Must have been hidden here. Maybe the mother was fleeing from something and couldn't make it. Asterisk, Ellie looked up at him, her eyes full of worry. We can't leave him, Daddy. He'll die. Asterisk, Jack hesitated. He knew how tense things were between the townspeople and the nearby native tribes. Taking their child, even with good intentions, could be seen as a threat. But looking at the baby and at his daughter's pleading face, he nodded. We'll take him home, just until someone comes for him. Asterisk, back in the village, the reaction was mixed. Some neighbors were outraged. You're playing with fire, Jack, one man said. What if the tribe thinks we kidnapped him? Asterisk, Ellie stepped forward and said with a firmness that stunned the adults. If helping someone survive is wrong, then I don't want to be right. Silence followed. Asterisk, that night, Ellie stayed up cradling the baby. She fed him warm milk, kept the fire going, and sang to him in a soft, gentle voice. Her parents watched her in awe. Despite being just 6, she carried herself like a protector. And Jack, trying to do the right thing, tied a blue ribbon on a tree near the forest, a sign of peace used by the local tribes. It was their way of saying, we have your child. He is safe. Come in peace. Asterisk, 2 days passed with no word. On the third morning, the sound of distant hooves echoed through the frosty air. The villagers froze. From over the hills, more than a dozen native warriors appeared on horseback, riding fast. They looked serious, armed, and ready. The town braced itself for conflict. Asterisk, Jack stepped out of the house, holding the child wrapped now in a soft red shawl. The warriors stopped a few yards away, their eyes scanning the village, the baby, the faces. Just as Jack moved forward, Ellie burst out of the house holding the blue blanket, the same one she had wrapped the baby in. She ran up beside her father and looked at the riders. This is his blanket, she said. Please, give it back to him. It'll keep him warm. Asterisk, Ann. Older man among the warriors slowly dismounted. His face was weathered, lined with years of wisdom, sorrow, and strength. He looked at Ellie, then at the child, then back at the blanket. He stepped forward, knelt down in front of Ellie, and gently placed his hand on her head. Asterisk, you are not a little girl, he said softly. You are a spirit sent by the Great One. You saved our child. Asterisk, then he stood, turned to his men, and gave a signal. One by one, the warriors dismounted and bowed before Ellie. The villagers watched, stunned. The same people they feared were now bowing to a child. Something powerful had just happened, and it was only the beginning. The sun had barely risen beyond the hills when the tribe began to gather near the village. After the warriors bowed before little Ellie, the village remained in silent awe, unsure of what would happen next. But there was no violence, no tension only, a deep silence that felt sacred. The elder who had spoken to Ellie turned and addressed Jack and his wife. "Come with us," he said, "and bring the girl." At first, Jack hesitated. Bringing his daughter into unfamiliar territory seemed risky. But then Ellie reached for his hand and whispered, "I want to go, Daddy." Jack looked into her eyes. There was no fear, only calmness, as though she understood something the rest of the world hadn't. The tribe led them through the valley, past frozen streams and towering red cliffs, until they arrived at a hidden camp nestled in a grove of pine trees. There were dozens of tents arranged in a circle, smoke gently rising from the chimneys. Women stirred soup in iron pots, and children peeked out from behind tree trunks, watching the strangers with wide, curious eyes. Ellie's eyes fell upon one woman, her face pale and tear-streaked, her body trembling as she spotted the child. In Jack's arms? She gasped and collapsed to her knees. It was the baby's mother. She had been separated from her group during a snowstorm and attacked by a mountain lion. In the chaos, she had hidden the baby and drawn the predator away. She barely escaped with her life and returned to the camp believing her child was gone. Forever. As she cradled her baby in her arms once more, she looked at Ellie with such gratitude that she began to weep. She spoke in her native tongue, and the elder translated, "She says the spirits must have sent your daughter. No one else could have found the baby in time. She says you have given her more than life, you have given her soul back." The tribe invited Ellie and her parents to stay for a day, to rest, eat, and be honored. Jack and his wife, unsure at first, agreed out of respect. What followed was something they never imagined. That night, under a sky bursting with stars, the tribe lit a sacred fire. The chief, dressed in a headdress of eagle feathers, stood before the flames and addressed everyone. He spoke of courage, kindness, and unity. Then he turned to Ellie. "You may be small, but your heart is greater than the mountains," he said. "In our tribe's memory, no outsider has ever been honored like this. Tonight, you are one of us." They wrapped Ellie in a traditional shawl, embroidered with patterns of the eagle and moon. It was their highest sign of respect, a gift reserved for tribal heroes. Ellie smiled shyly, holding her parents' hands.
Not aware that she was now part of history.
The next morning. As they prepared to return to their village, the tribe gave them bundles of dried meat, woven baskets, and a carved totem of protection. "For Ellie, you will always be welcome in our land," the chief said, "and when the time comes, we will return the kindness." Back in the village, things were different. People who had once scoffed at Jack and Ellie now looked at them with quiet reverence. Word of what happened spread beyond the valley even. Reaching neighboring towns, travelers came, eager to hear the tale of the little girl and the tribe. Some didn't believe it, but those who saw the blue blanket and the tribal shawl knew the truth. Months passed. Winter turned to spring. Ellie returned to her routines, playing with animals, helping her mother in the garden. But something in her had changed. She wasn't just a child anymore. She had seen something most adults hadn't. The power of compassion crossing barriers. No war ever could. Then, one evening, a rider approached the village. He bore the markings of the same tribe. "The chief sends word," he said. "He asks that you come." Concerned, Jack and his family followed the rider back to the camp. They found the chief gravely ill. Around him stood members of the tribe, looking to Ellie with hope. "You carry a spirit of healing," the chief whispered. "Not medicine, but heart." Ellie sat beside him, holding his hand. She didn't know any ancient chants, but she sang a soft lullaby, one her mother used to sing to her. The chief smiled faintly. "Your voice carries the warmth of the earth," he said. And with that, he closed his eyes peacefully. Asterisk at his funeral. Ellie was invited to place the first branch on the ceremonial pyre in honor never before given to anyone outside the tribe. As the flames rose, a new chief was chosen. He turned to Ellie and placed a beaded necklace around her neck. "You are not outsider," he said. "You are our morning star." Asterisk years passed. Ellie grew up and often visited the tribe, she learned. Their stories shared her own and built bridges that others had torn down generations ago. The blue blanket was kept safe in a special chest, now more a symbol than fabric, the baby she once saved. He grew up to become a storyteller, one who traveled far and wide, telling the tale of how a 6-year-old girl saved him, and in doing so, changed the fate of 2 peoples. Asterisk the town that once feared the tribes now shared markets, festivals, and friendships. It all began with one blanket, and one little girl who refused to walk away from a cry in the cold. Asterisk, and that, dear viewer, is the real power of kindness. Asterisk, if this story touched your heart even a little, we invite you to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories like this, where love, courage, and humanity shine through in the most unexpected ways. See you in the next one. Asterisk, 2 decades had passed since the day a little girl offered her blanket to a freezing baby and changed the course of history. The valley, once divided by fear and suspicion, had become a place of unity. The small town and the neighboring native tribe, once worlds apart, now stood together in trade, celebration, and shared responsibility. But as time moved on, so did people, and not all remembered how it had begun. Asterisk, Ellie. Now a young woman in her 20s lived on a small ranch near the forest's edge, close to the land where it had all begun. She was known across the region, not just as the girl with the blanket, but as a healer, teacher, and bridge between 2 cultures. She spent her days tending to animals, teaching children stories and songs from both her own culture and the tribe's, but something had changed in the valley. Asterisk, a new mayor had taken charge of the town, ambitious, cold, and skeptical of the old tales. He considered the peaceful ties with the tribe nothing more than a sentimental fantasy. "We need growth," he declared in one of his meetings, "and that land they sit on, it could be used for mills, roads, even factories. Wasted on stories and bonfires." Asterisk, the tribe's new chief. The very child Ellie had once saved, now a strong, wise man, named to heart of these discussions, and visited Ellie one foggy morning. "They've forgotten," he said quietly, staring across the valley. "They no longer see us as family. They see soil, timber, and stone. It's not spirit." Asterisk, Ellie felt the same ache. She had noticed the changes to how some shopkeepers no longer traded with tribal families. How children repeated lines they'd heard from their parents. "They don't belong here." She couldn't believe that all the progress, all the healing could be lost so quickly. But history has a cruel habit of repeating itself when not preserved. Asterisk, that evening, Ellie visited her father, now older and slower but still wise. She sat by the fire, holding the same blue blanket she'd once wrapped around a freezing baby. "Do you think one moment really can change things forever?" she asked him. Asterisk, Jack smiled gently. "Did once. But even fire needs to be fed. Kindness doesn't last on memory alone. It needs action." "Remind them, Ellie, not with anger, but with truth." Asterisk, inspired, Ellie rode into the town square the next morning. She set up a table, unfolded the blue blanket, and placed a single sign. "Do you remember?" Slowly, people gathered, curious, skeptical. Some recognized the blanket instantly, some didn't. Children stared. Elderly nodded. Ellie stood before them and began to speak, not with a microphone, not with drama, but with heart. Asterisk, she told. The story again, word for word. How a baby had been saved. How a tribe had bowed in gratitude. How enemies became family. She called Tahanu to her side, and he spoke next not as a chief, but as a man once saved by love. Together, they reminded the town that peace was not a policy, it was a choice made over and over again. Asterisk, but the mayor wasn't moved. The next day he signed a proposal to annex tribal lands. Machines rolled in, trees fell, protests erupted, but nothing stopped the development until the storms came. Asterisk that week, torrential rains battered the valley. Creeks swelled, roads cracked, homes flooded. The very factory the mayor had ordered built was swallowed by a landslide. Desperate townsfolk looked for safety, but the hills were too dangerous, and the roads impassable. Then something happened no one expected. The tribe opened their sacred lands and welcomed every single villager inside. They provided dry tents, warm food, healing herbs, and open arms. The same people who once ignored their presence were now sleeping under their roofs. No one was turned away. Ellie watched it all unfold. She saw the mothers who once whispered, suspicions now weeping in gratitude. She saw the mayor, humbled and broken, approach Tahanu in shame. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I thought power lay in land and walls, but it's in hearts." Tahanu didn't say much, simply pointed toward Ellie and said, "She showed us long ago." A week later, when the waters receded and the village began to rebuild, everything had changed. The lines were gone. A new town hall was built with 2 flags flying together, one of the town, one of the tribe. And in the center stood a statue, a little girl kneeling, offering a blanket to a baby. It was named the Gift of Warmth. Schools began to teach both tribal history and town heritage as one story. Markets blended flavors, crafts, music. People remembered not because of pain, but because they chose to carry the story forward. Ellie. She never claimed credit. She simply returned to her ranch, raised animals, helped others, and visited the tribal land every week. She and Tahanu remained close, a symbol of what could happen when love replaces fear. And that blue blanket? It was placed behind glass in the town museum not as a relic, but as a reminder. Years later, children would point at it and ask, did it really all start with this? And every teacher, every elder, every voice would say the same, yes, because one little girl didn't walk away. So, if this story touched you, reminded you of something real in this world, don't forget to be that kindness for someone else. And if you believe in stories that heal hearts and bring us together, subscribe to this channel, because the world needs more Ellies, and maybe you are one too. Many winters had come and gone since the world first heard about the little girl with the blue blanket. Ellie, now in her late 50s, had long silver streaks in her golden hair. But her spirit was as warm and grounded as it had been that day in the woods so many years ago. She still lived at the edge of the forest, in a humble wooden home surrounded by wildflowers, animals, and quiet winds that whispered stories through the pine. The statue of the Gift of Warmth now stood not only in her town, but in other towns across the region. The story of a single act of kindness had spread far beyond the valley, taught in schools and retold around campfires. People who had never met her spoke her name as if she were a myth. But Ellie never let herself forget the truth, that she had simply followed her heart. She had no children of her own, but she had mentored many. One in particular was a young girl named Clara, smart, feisty, and filled with the same fire that had once burned in Ellie's 6-year-old soul. Clara was only 10, but she spent every afternoon at Ellie's side, listening to old tales, feeding injured birds, and learning how to truly listen to the land. One quiet evening, as the sky turned shades of orange and violet, Clara looked up at Ellie and asked, "Did you ever wonder why it was you? Why you were the one to find the baby that day?" Ellie paused. She had asked herself that question more times than she could count. "Maybe because I was willing to stop," she said softly. Everyone else kept walking. But there was more to the story than even Ellie knew. That truth was about to reveal itself, hundreds of miles away. In a modern city with flashing lights and endless noise, a young man named Aiden sat in his apartment, staring at a hand-carved necklace that had been passed down to him. He was Tahanu's son. The child Ellie had saved was now a father himself. And Aiden, raised between 2 cultures, was searching for something that had been calling him his entire life. He had heard the story 1,000 times. if it weren't for that blanket, his father often said, I wouldn't be here. Asterisk, but Aiden wasn't just curious, he was unsettled. Something about the story had always felt incomplete. That night, he packed a small bag and boarded a bus heading north, toward the valley of his father's birth, toward Ellie. Asterisk, when he arrived days later, Ellie welcomed him as if he were her own kin. They sat for hours beneath the statue, surrounded by wild grass and quiet wind. Aiden looked into her eyes and said, I think there's something I'm supposed to do, but I don't know what. Asterisk, Ellie smiled knowingly. That's how I felt at 6. Asterisk, as they talked, Ellie suddenly stood up and walked into her old barn. A few minutes later, she emerged holding a long, thin wooden box. She opened it to reveal the original blue blanket, caged, frayed, but still holding warmth in its threads. I think this is yours now, she said, handing it to Aiden. He hesitated. No, it belongs to you. Asterisk, Ellie shook her head. It belongs to what comes next. Asterisk, that night, Aiden slept under the same blanket that had once saved him, though he had no memory of it. But dreams filled his mind, visions of the forest, the snow, a girl's small hands. When he awoke, he knew what he had to do. The next day, Aiden and Clara hiked deep into the forest where Ellie had once found him. They walked for hours until they came to a quiet clearing. There, with Ellie watching silently from a distance, Aiden began building something by hand from stone and wood and memory. A healing circle, not for tourists, not for fame, but for children, for mothers, for strangers to sit in silence and remember what kindness felt like. Asterisk, weeks passed, and others came, tribal families, townsfolk, travelers. The space became a haven. People left notes in jars, shared. Songs forgave each other. Asterisk. And then one evening, Clara found a tiny bundle just outside the circle, wrapped in a blanket. A baby, quiet, alone, but alive. Ellie's hands trembled as she lifted the child. It's happening again, she whispered. Asterisk, but this time, no one hesitated. The entire town responded. Word spread to the tribe. Together, they searched the forest and found a wounded mother, days later half conscious, but alive. She had been running from something darker, a group that believed only one culture should remain. Now, Ellie understood. The story wasn't over. The blanket wasn't just a memory, it was a legacy still in motion. In the years that followed, the healing circle became a sanctuary. Generations came and went, but Ellie's name was etched in the heart of every child who learned the story. Aiden started a foundation in her name, Blanket of the Earth, providing warmth, shelter, and unity to those in need across nations. Clara grew up and became a storyteller, traveling the world with one message: the smallest act can echo for lifetimes. And Ellie, she passed peacefully one spring morning, birds singing outside her window, the blue blanket folded neatly at her side. At her funeral, thousands gathered, tribal dancers, town elders, city mayors, children from distant lands, spoke one last time beside her resting place. She didn't just save a life, she showed us how to live. As the final shovelful of earth was placed on her grave, Clara stood forward and unfolded the blue blanket over the mound. Rest now, she said. Your story is safe with us. And it was. Because in a world constantly breaking apart, one little girl proved that even a single thread, when woven with love, can hold everything together. Asterisk, if this story reminded you of the power we all hold to change the world, even with the smallest gesture. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories just like this. Asterisk, because somewhere out there, cry in the cold is waiting. Asterisk. And maybe you will be the one who hears it next. Asterisk.